Welcome, everybody, to another Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt.
And I'm Jadrian.
And we are excited. This is episode 12 that we're recording, and this is the first for us to have a special guest today. Joining us today is professor at Robert Morris University, Brian O'Rourke.
Hey guys, it's great to be here. I have to say this is kind of a fanboy experience. I've listened to every episode, so thanks for having me on.
That's why you're the first guest, is you've listened. No, appreciate it. We've talked about your work before, and Brian and I have done some YouTube videos before, and even have some more that are still coming out in the near future. And Econ Ed is a small world, so we've all known each other for a while, but we're excited. Brian, I guess we haven't, I don't know if you knew the drill. I maybe forgot to share the drill with you ahead of time, but we always like to start by sharing what we're drinking today. So
he does listen to every episode, so
Yeah,
I think
so
he should know the drill by now.
That's the most important part usually of the episode.
Good deal. So,
all right, so you guys are beer drinkers. I've started drinking beer in part because I listen to this podcast. So, I don't know if you can be arrested for contributing to the corruption of the young or anything like that. But because I'm not a huge beer drinker, I did not want to make a fool of myself here. And because on Saturday was one of my favorite days of the year. It's Derby Day. So today I am drinking the house drink at my house. This is our version of a mint julep. It's made with Crown Royal and simple syrup. Usually it's mint syrup, and also usually we dump a bunch of powdered sugar on top. And the rule is you can't wipe your face until the bucket's empty. And we do usually make it in a bucket, but I thought that would end up, things would go totally sideways if I had a bucket full of Crown Royal here. So I'm drinking the house version of the mint julep.
I have a great story for this in a second. Matt, I'll go next. I'll add my story later. Sticking with the Virginia beers, triple note from Star Hill Brewery. It is a fruited Belgian style golden ale. So I'm going with a kind of a Belgian ale.
very cool. Very cool. And I've been tired of you just doing all the local beers. I am doing a Rusty Rail Brewing Moonmath IPA, hazy IPA. I actually have not had this one before, so I'm excited.
I actually just went up to, right, so I went to State College last week, and my friend actually got me 2 6-packs of Rusty Rail beers that I have not had. And mostly it is just full of IPAs. Because those are the ones I haven't had from. I should have got a Rusty Rail beer, but I thought about making it a Pennsylvania beer since both of you are in Pennsylvania. But got to stick with my Virginia beers.
Well, cheers as we start the conversation.
Yeah,
cheers. So my pint glass today, Happy Valley Brewing Company. So I'm semi Pennsylvania here. Brian, I have a great story. Mint julep is actually my favorite mixed drink.
Oh.
I think that's the best mixed drink ever created. I absolutely love it. I'm going to tell you the most pretentious story and my most pretentious experience around a mint julep because I was so mad. I went to a bar in State College, February or something. It was like a regular bar. It was actually a whiskey bar. It was called Local Whiskey. So I don't live there. I can say the name. It is a whiskey bar. And I was like, ooh, you know what? I'm really craving a mint julep. But it was February. So I sit at the bar and I'm like, I would like a mint julep. And he looked at me and he goes, we're not going to make you that. We don't have any mint's not in season right now. And I stared at him for a second. I was like, is he messing with me? Is this like one of those jokes where where a bartender's trying to be funny? And I was like, no, really, I want a mint julep. And he goes, no, really, we don't have mint because it's not in season right now. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I want now because I was really settled on this. And then the very next day I went to a different bar and I was like, hey, do you have mint? And they look over, they go, yeah, of course we have mint. Why would we not have mint? And I was like, just curious. This other bar told me it wasn't in season. And I was like, can you make me a mint julep? And they made it immediately. And I never went back to that bar ever again. And anytime people would invite me there, I go, I'm not going there. The bartender's pretentious because they won't go get mint from Wegmans. I guess they grow their own mint and they won't use anything else.
No, that's horrible. I was down in Jamaica and was on a tour off of the property and sat next to a guy who was there on his honeymoon. And his job was, he was a mint farmer. I'm like, dude, that's not a job. Mint I can't stop it from growing around here.
That's why you have a whole pile of it in your drink.
Well, exactly.
That's
it's
funny.
like the first mint of the year, but it certainly won't be the last.
So funny.
Matt, I guess, is your favorite mixed drink a Moscow Mule?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's like a neighbor. That's close enough.
It's in a copper mug. So we're here today. Today is Wednesday, May 10th, and this will be the first time we are going to record and then release the episode the next day on May 11th. The inflation report came out, and that's part of the reason why Brian's going to join us. The three of us were going to talk through the latest inflation report and discuss a little bit about what it said, what the reports say in general, what we find interesting, confusing, and what it means for everybody. So Brian, Jadrian, either of you want to start us off by what were the headlines on the inflation report today?
So I think we always define the inflation reports. I feel like we should define it first, and I'll take the easy one and I'll define it. Because I've said this multiple times before, I'm not a macroeconomist, so I will probably get this completely wrong. I would say my simplest version, and so Brian or Matt, you can correct me, please, if I'm overselling it or missing something important. It is essentially how a bundle of prices changes over a certain period of time. So the BLS takes a basket of goods that has historically changed at some times, but not other times, and they correct for things like quality. But essentially, imagine like you have a shopping cart of stuff, and some of that stuff is like your rent and your electricity and your food, and then they compare that price over time. And the inflation rate is basically how much was it last year? If you get an annualized number, how much was it last year? How much does that cart cost today? The percentage difference is the inflation report. That's my very simple 30-second explanation. Do you think I did a good job?
That's not too bad, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I used a shopping cart. I used a shopping cart example in class.
Okay.
It's like I'd say it's like you're going into the world's biggest Costco, and you've got the world's most giant shopping cart, and just
put a
start
house
throwing
in there.
one of everything in there, and then when you get up to the cashier, they're just looking at you like, "What is this?" But you get your receipt, and all you're doing is comparing the receipt this month to the receipt next month, and seeing if the prices change.
Yep. And they try to weight it. I mean, it's based on urban consumers' market basket, so it tries to figure out how much will people pay for rent, for electricity, for eating out at restaurants, for
I don't know if I got to tell you this. I was actually part of the inflation report once, like in an economist's dream. I was in grad school. Somebody knocks on my door, and I open it, and they're like, "Hi, I'm from the BLS." Well, they said Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they were like, "We're collecting data for the monthly or the CPI report or whatever." And like, they used my apartment or the census, right? They used my apartment as one of the data points in like the rental calculation in my part of Washington. And I was like, this is a dream. Yes, I would love to tell you how much my rent is. Right. Because they were like, how many bathrooms do you have? How many bedrooms do you have? How big is this apartment?
So yeah, and I mean, it was
so cool. I was like, I was nerdy. And so of course the data collector was just like, what's wrong with this dude?
And that's a good idea of what they do, right? They try to figure out what are the average basket of goods that individuals buy, and then how do the prices change and we get a report every month. The headline number is often the annualized number. Mm-hmm. So Jadrian, you took the easy one on defining it. Brian, do you want to try to summarize? What do you think the headline is from the inflation report released today?
Well, based on all the news stories out there, the headline is that it was the CPI came in lower than expected. So inflation wasn't up quite as much as some of the economists predicted. And that sort of, made people happy, I guess. And then they looked at the numbers a little bit more carefully. I don't know if the stock market oftentimes overreacts to what the inflation number is. So the market went up, and then the market went really, really down. And by the end of the day, it was actually just down a little bit. To me, that's one of the more interesting things when the inflation number is released, is how the stock market reacts, and it just goes crazy when the numbers are either above or below what people expect. So to me, I guess, that's the biggest thing as far as the news overall. I saw one news story today, and I looked at a lot, but I saw one news story who just nailed it. And they said, yeah, okay, the inflation rate is down, but prices are still going up faster than what everybody would like. And I think that's, for the normal person, that's what we should be taking away. For the average person, that's what we should be taking away from the inflation statistic, is that, okay, it's not as bad as it was 12 months ago, but it's still going up. And when you look at it from a statistical perspective, if it's going up from a higher base, that's so bad. People are like, oh, it's not going up as quickly. Great. But CPI, so the CPI is measured as basically it's like a 3-digit number with a couple numbers past a decimal point. And so we're looking at whether that number has changed. And if it goes up, there's inflation. If it goes down, there's deflation. But the number gets bigger and bigger every month because we're having inflation every month. And now the increase isn't as fast, but it's an increase over a bigger number, which means prices are still going up way faster than you want them to.
I never thought of that. I never connected those dots. That makes, absolute sense, right? Like a 4% change from a base of like 50 is very different than a 4% change of a base of 100.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, that's a fascinating point, right? Because year over year, it's 4.9%. That's what the numbers came out today. It said. So from last year, April report to this year's April report, prices are 4.9% higher. But if they were 10% higher the year before that, basically it compared to if it was 0 the year before that, that's an extra half a percentage point, right? I mean, that the prices are up overall. That's fascinating.
So one of the things I struggle with in terms of when I talk to people about inflation, and I don't know, I can't seem to say it right. So maybe y'all can come up with the right phrase to make this sound better. When I talk about the inflation rate coming down, people always want to seem to say that prices are coming down. And I'm like, no, that's actually not it. Like the inflation rate coming down, it's sort of like what Brian said, is the prices are still going up, but just not as much as they were going up before. And so it's really hard. I don't know why. I really struggle to talk to people about decreasing inflation is still increasing prices. And that actual deflation would be concerning if you saw like widespread prices just suddenly dropping kind of all over the place. I don't know. Do you have a good way of like when you teach that or when you talk to people about that?
I don't know that I teach it well. Disinflation is the word that I'd use. And I don't know that that's the right. I don't know that that's the right phrasing for it, right? The inflation rate is going up, but not as much. And that's what's happening right now. So
yeah, and that's another, I mean, if you think about what the Fed's trying to do, the Fed wants the rate to go down, but they don't want it to go to 0.
Yeah.
They still are expecting or even desiring some inflation. So, if we get to the 2%, the Fed will be happy, the news will won't be on the front page anymore, but it's still prices increasing. So, all right, should we be happy about prices continually increasing? I guess it kind of gets to what are you prepared to accept, and can you manage that? So when inflation goes up sort of unexpectedly, it's really difficult for people to deal with because they didn't budget for it. They're not getting raises to help them combat that inflation. But if it's a steady 2%, prices keep going up. But I can kind of build that into my budget.
So actually speaking, as you said that, I have a question. I think Matt and I sort of talked about this, months ago. And I'm curious on this stance as well too. Often we hear people talk about getting raises that are outpacing inflation. So this is not going to be higher wages causes inflation. I'm not going that direction. But you hear these conversations about people needing raises that are higher than inflation to not be ready for it. But it almost feels like you never hear the other side of that story of, like inflation wasn't that much, so we're not going to give you that much of a raise. Like I still expect a raise every year. And so I always wonder, like in some senses I think we talked about this in like an income smoothing type idea, is that some years I might be worse off where inflation is higher than what my raise is, but in other years I should have pay raises greater than what my inflation is. I wonder why we sort of ignore one half of that story and only get mad about when we're not meeting inflation.
I actually had someone who runs a business ask me about this. They said, all right, if inflation comes down, I'm not going to be able to cut my workers' wages.
Yeah.
So am I in a position now where I'm permanently going to have to pay people more? And I think you are. It's like people just won't accept lower wages once they, especially if they've been at a job for a while. Now, you might be able to hire new workers in at slightly lower wages, but I think it's because we're dealing with people. And oftentimes the people part of it gets lost in the data. But because we're dealing with people, it's really difficult to say, hey, inflation wasn't so high, so we're going to either not give you as much of a raise or maybe even cut your wages. And that you're going to lose your workers if you do that.
I mean, and that's part of the reason why we see recessions often following drops in inflation, because a contract might be built on an expectation of 6% or 7 or 8% inflation. And so somebody gets 7%, but then inflation was only 3%. Well, the firm is paying an extra 4% above what they were paying, but they're not making up for it in prices. And some of the firms then have to go out of business or lay off employees because they can't cover the cost. That's always one of the reasons why cuts in inflation, why I've thought cuts in inflation would lead to higher unemployment rates, especially if they're not expected, whereas increases in inflation could lead to lower unemployment rates because you're like, oh, wow, I'm getting a 7% raise. Like, well, yeah, but inflation was 10% last year, or, right? I mean, if somebody's worked and anybody who's on a union contract, for example, where you're on these set wages, these set increases over 2 or 3 years, when inflation spikes to 10%, right, the firms are doing well for that year and a half.
So as you say that, we should actually probably mention the other types of inflation. And I think this is where I say, from an economic standpoint, as an economics professor, this is the part of like the conversations I absolutely love. But I also feel like this is the part of the conversation where I feel like people look at economists and go, what's wrong with y'all? Right. So we've been talking about headline inflation, sort of all items, which is 4.9%. But economists like to have, we have other levels of inflation too. So there is what's known as core inflation. And again, just double check me. And if I'm wrong, just say I'm wrong. My understanding is it's inflation without energy prices in it, but it still includes home price or rental prices.
Energy,
that's super core. They have a new one, right? They have super core inflation.
Core. Yeah.
That
energy and food, I think, are the main core.
In core, right?
Okay.
Right. So you take
those
out.
It is. Oh, it's energy and food are the ones that count.
No, I'm sorry. All items except for food and energy.
Okay. Food and energy come out.
Yep.
That's core inflation. So that's things like clothes, transportation, like what sort of things would include
entertainment, shelter.
Yeah. And then the super core is the core, but then you subtract out rent.
Yeah. So I'll say this is why economists love it, because economists like to talk about these sort of differentiators. So like the example I always give in my courses is like the unemployment rate. There's one number that everybody in the country looks at, which they don't necessarily get right either. But there's one number that gets reported, and then economists are like, look at these other 6 measures. And we get super nerdy about all these like 6 different measures of what's going on. And I feel like inflation's the same sort of way, where you hear one number that people really, really care about, and we're all over here going, well, but the core inflation is doing this. So we can talk about that, because actually this is where the reason I wanted to go with this is sort of going back to that budget idea. When I think about things like rent, for example, so I mean, I own a home. I think all 3 of us own our homes. Mm-hmm. But when I think about somebody renting, I don't know if this is so much in my like living in a college town mindset. Like the rents were always year-long leases. I know that there are places that have 3-month, 6-month, 1-month leases and things like that. And so I always sort of wonder, when rental prices make up a big chunk of that basket of what people are spending money on, for a lot of people, I guess a lot of it comes down to when you sign that lease. If rental prices are up, but if I'm locked into a lease, maybe it's not changing by that much. But it also could just be, I'm very privileged and I own a home, and so my mortgage is the same every single month, and I don't see anything about it. Is that something that I think people should? Is that something that people like should worry about? Do worry about? Like I have no context here of things like that.
I think you might have to restate. I'm sorry. So they should worry about what exactly?
Should they or should they not? So should people who are in like a year-long lease, for example, so if rental prices are like the big driver of inflation, so let's say that they are, right? Like maybe food's really not changing by that much, but it's really like coming heavily from rent or from gas prices or something that people aren't consuming. Is that something that people should people be concerned that like they're going to see price changes later? Should people not be worried about it because it doesn't affect them? I think we've talked about this in a macro stance. I have a hard time connecting with things that don't like personally affect me. It's like gas prices don't really affect me. Rental prices don't affect me. And so it's hard for me to like really know which things I should be really concerned about.
It's a good question. I mean, I guess it depends. So how much have you locked in? Essentially, by owning a house, you're hedging in some ways, it's almost a hedge against future price risk, right? From that point of view. If you're renting, is it the inflation that makes it concerning? Is it the inflation
are
rate
people
going up?
changing? Like, are landlords changing people's rents? Is that a thing that people do? Like, are they really kind of jacking up rents based
year
off
to
of
year?
inflation rates?
Oh,
Yeah, I have
sure.
no idea.
Yeah.
I haven't rented a home in like a decade.
Well, I mean, I don't think I don't think landlords are changing it based on the inflation rate. I think they're changing it based on market demand, right? And if they're, because there's a set number of spaces available and they'd get a good sense. But if a year later they think, you know what, inflation's up 10% and I'm pretty sure I can get 10 or 12% more, they absolutely would raise the prices that much. So I would think that would be a big concern for anybody renting. And yeah, I think, I've felt pretty insulated from rent prices have been a big driver of inflation. I've felt somewhat insulated from that recently. Brian, what's your take?
I love, right now, there's one thing I tell my students that I love about inflation, and that is that I locked in at a super low mortgage rate. And so when inflation goes up, I'm repaying money that's worth less than I borrowed. But for renters, it's, you can't lock in for more than, I don't know, however long, I guess.
A year. I feel like a year. Yeah. I've maybe seen 2 years, but that's so rare.
Yeah.
Or like as a landlord, why would I want to lock somebody in for like, especially
you don't
want to lock them in unless like there's something special about that place.
No. And so Matt made a good point about supply as an issue with housing. So if you're trying to build new rental units at this time when your costs are going through the roof, then rents are going to be really high. And every time you have an opportunity to raise rents, you're going to do that, or you're going to cut back on, maintenance, or, you're going to try to cut back on whatever is driving your costs. So there's so many places where it's hard to build, whether it's zoning laws or just, local opposition to building, that it, keeps a cap on supply. And that's one of the things that drives inflation, is when you have supply restraints or supply constraints and demand for a particular product is going, it keeps rising, but the supply doesn't change. So you have that, what do we call it? Demand push. Is that right? It's
push or pull inflation. Yeah.
I always get them backwards. And then
I know.
Students are like, wait, but it says in the book, it's push or pull. But yeah, so it's demand.
Didn't you write?
I would say, don't they say in your book, Brian? In your book, it says this.
I got to fight with one of the other authors on that. And
for those who don't know, Brian is author of Essentials of Economics, co-author of an Essentials of Economics textbook through Norton Publishing with Dirk Mateer and Lee Kopic. Fantastic book. I didn't teach the Essentials version, but I used Dirk and Lee's books when I was most recently teaching. Jadrian, you brought up a point that I think is kind of in an offhand way here, in that, should we be worried about rent? But we talked about food and energy, right? The inflation rate overall doesn't mean it's the amount of prices go up for any one product. And looking actually, and we'll put a link to this in the description, the Bureau of Labor Statistics report, which when the inflation report comes out, I'd recommend going to it. It's a wonderful read. It's leisurely, it's like something to do for fun, but they actually have a really great chart where it shows all items, it's 4.9%, all items less food and energy, it's a little over 5%. So the core is a little over 5%. And this is for the past year. What has it been year over year? Food prices are up. I'm just looking at the chart and it doesn't have the numbers exactly. It's about 7.5% over the past year, but energy prices are down about 5% over the past year. And my guess is a lot of that's the drop in gasoline. So each specific market has its own demand and supply issues that push the price, but it's a pretty huge difference between food prices being up dramatically and energy prices being down dramatically over the past year.
So let me follow up, and I'm going to ask you two questions that I've gotten before that I struggled to answer with. And I think this kind of links all together too. And I think it goes back to the, I don't feel the impact. And so I don't have good answers for this. So somebody who is being impacted by things like food prices, energy prices, what sort of things can people actually do to like really make a change. So like, right, like I think the super cheesy answer is, right, change what you're in your bundle, don't eat chicken, eat beef, like that sort of thing. But like realistically, I feel like somebody who previously was already, I think Brian said it earlier about like being at a budget, right? Like if you have budgeted this for groceries and then all of a sudden large chunks of things are increasing, right? Like the headline stuff was, eggs was such a huge change, but eggs are such a staple dish of like really easy protein. What sort of like real changes could somebody make as a response to 7% increases in prices of just food on average?
Well, one of the things around me, so I live out in the country. I guess you could consider this the country.
I would consider it the country. Yes.
Yeah, we're about 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, and it's relatively rural. But one of the things that happened out here was that people started raising their own chickens. People who were well off started raising their own chickens, and people who were not well off started raising their own chickens. And that's you sort of go back to kind of this farming mentality where, I'll just grow my own food. Seeds are pretty cheap. Chicks are really cheap, although you do have to feed them. They have to grow a little bit before they can start laying. But that's really not productive in terms, if we think about it from a macro perspective. We don't want people growing their own food and raising their own chickens, because that takes away from more productive uses of their time.
Yeah, that's like chapter 2 in your book, I think. I think
that's something like that.
That's one of the real early chapters. We don't want everybody doing this.
No. So, it's when people try to combat inflation for certain things on their own, the whole economy, it might be good for them at the micro level, but the whole economy suffers as people move away from what they're good at, what they specialize in.
Yeah, that's, you asked like the super cheesy answer of changing the bundle. That's the one I default to, right? I don't know what else to do. Like, one grocery item that's gone up dramatically in price that our family consumes way too much of.
Soda.
It's
soda. It's soda.
Coke.
Yeah.
So is that because the soda's more expensive, or the aluminum for the cans is more expensive? It doesn't matter.
I don't know. So the 2-liter bottles they've gone up as well, similar into a similar fashion. So I've bought Walmart Diet Coke, and I bought Wise Markets Diet Coke. Do I think that is as good as Diet Coke? No, I do not. But it's a reasonable substitute, and it's less than half the cost. And could we really just buy all Diet Coke? Well, sure we could, but we drank enough where it's actually a sizable difference, monetary difference for our family by switching from, and it's, this isn't an entire switch. We have still some Diet Coke, but then maybe after the first Diet Coke in the morning, or 2 Diet Cokes in the morning, then I might switch to the other type of beverage. So yes, to everybody, I drink way too much diet soda.
You haven't tried getting those devices that'll carbonate the water for
Soda
you?
Stream?
Yeah,
we attempted that once.
No,
yeah,
false advertising.
I'm sure it goes great for some people. I don't know. And once again, there's a time cost there, right? Is that the most productive use of time? So one thing kind of just wanted to raise on the report that I think is interesting for people to think about is what we've been hearing about is you hear about the 4.9% year over year. And last month you heard about whatever it was, 5% or 5.1 or whatever it was. But they do estimate how much it went up in the past month. And that, it's essentially the cumulative, it might be a hair more complicated than this, but the cumulative increases month by month essentially create the annual increase. Not quite, because, if you have a 1% increase 1 month, then the 0.4 is built upon that. But so I always think it's interesting to see in the past month, how much did things increase? And, for the past month in April, it was 0.4%. That was the increase, which averages out to 4.8, which is right about where we are for 4.9. But sometimes those numbers are pretty different, where, the inflation was this much year over year, but in the past month, it was either much higher or much lower if you tried to annualize that out.
Yeah. And when I saw that number, so I looked at the report right when it came out, and I saw that 4.4%. I thought, this is really, really going to be bad, because last month it was only 0.1. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much higher than people expected. And, the markets are going to melt down, and, the policymakers are going to be pulling their hair out. But because the annualized rate wasn't as bad, that's like you were back to what you were saying earlier. That's the headline number. Most people look at the year over year. They don't look at the month to month.
Yeah. So that's the 0.4 would indicate, I mean, if this is the steady state, like that 4.9% that we're talking about, it contains all those high inflation months that we still had in April, May, June, July. But then we've had some lower stretches. So 0.4 would indicate that, okay, if this is the steady state, if this is the equilibrium, we're going to be at 5% inflation if things don't drop over time.
I have fun data for you guys that I think you'll like, because we're coming up at like our normal transition time, but I want to share two things with you that I found. I don't know if you've ever realized this. I actually was able to ask a BLS economist about this. Have you ever noticed that when the BLS reports like inflation or like real values, nominal values, it always talks about like the 1982, $84, like it gives you those dollars from the 80s.
Okay.
Brian shaking his head yes. Matt, do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, you said the base year is 82 to 84.
The base year is 82 to $84.
Yeah.
We had a BLS economist come and talk to our students about just, what are jobs at the BLS? What does the BLS do? Things like that. And, I was there because it was part of the econ club, and they made the mistake of saying, does anybody have any questions? Anyone can ask questions. Like, it doesn't matter how hard the question is. I'll try to answer it. And I was like, I've always wanted to know this. I was like, why is the default 1982 to 84? Like, why is that the thing? Yeah. And in the moment she goes, I have no idea. That nobody has ever asked me that question.
That's awesome.
Really? I can't believe no one's asked that.
She said no one has ever asked her that. So she did eventually go ask like one of the another economist, like what's going on. So this was super, super interesting. So Brian earlier mentioned this. I want to go back to it. He talked about the CPI, the bundle of prices is like you even said it, it's this 3-digit number. That's why. So the CPI is the consumer price index. It is like the idea is it's supposed to be indexed to 100, and like that way you can kind of tell prices and different things like that. So the CPI is currently 302. And so the idea is since 1982, it's gone up like 3 times as much. And so what she said was basically that as the number gets bigger, they will eventually revise that down and reweight it to a new year so that it goes like basically if it gets too far from 100, they will reweight the chains in order to make it 100 because they don't want it to be super far away. And so they said 1982-84 was like this very special year, like a combination of years where they changed essentially all of the weights in the basket. So they made a massive change in weighting to reset it to 100. So it will eventually, we won't use $1982-84 eventually. She said that it's going to change. They basically said that where they start to like talk about it is essentially once it gets over 500 is that they'll start to talk about like, we need to reset this back down to 100.
That'll be a while still. It'll
be a while. I don't know, not at this pace, right?
Actually, you're right. Maybe not at this pace. I mean, if we keep at 5 to 10% a year, it's not long. So
the other thing that I have for you, Matt, while you were talking, the BLS does track soda prices. So I have them for you. This is the average price of all soft drinks in a 12-pack, 12-ounce cans cost per 12 ounces. So it's a per can cost. Okay. I have converted it. So I have the Fred. I'm using Fred. So
it's
that's
per can cost on average.
So I could give you the per can cost, or I could do percent change from a year ago if you would like the inflation rate.
Yes, the per can. So this is the.
Okay, let me switch it back.
You're buying a 12-pack.
You're buying a 12-pack. What is the average cost of one of the cans of soda in the 12-pack
right now? Is that what you're saying? Like
April 2023.
I can guess. I'm not looking. I want to guess.
Yeah. April 2023. So yeah, it is the most recent one. So it is, I will say city average.
The average cost of a can in a 12-pack at a store right now. And I'm trying to think through here from the generics are a smaller percentage to Diet Cokes. So a 12-pack of Diet Coke right now, usually you're paying over $6. So that's over 50, but others are, I'll guess 51 cents.
That's pretty impressive. 55 cents.
Okay. I do drink too much.
Yeah. So let me give you the percent change from a year ago. That way you can have the inflation rate for it.
Yeah.
April 2023, the inflation rate for sodas 1 year before, 15.5%.
Wow. Okay.
The reason you started to cut back, if I had to guess, it was probably around last summer, was roughly when you were like, we need to slow down. So in the fall semester. Was that when y'all were like, this is getting too expensive?
I honestly don't remember. I've been buying the Wise Markets. So
I'll tell you the August number. Which is why I think this is when you probably noticed it. From August 2020. So actually, this is August 2022. So from 2021 to 2022, 31% increase.
Whoa. That's brutal. Well, the generics for Wise Up, which is their 7-Up, to me tastes great. I don't even ever, I have no desire to buy a diet Sprite if I don't have to. But the diet Cokes, I don't know. I think diet Cokes just taste good and they have a little more caffeine. Yeah, okay. So I'm not hallucinating, or it's not just our market.
It's been going up for a while.
So this is usually the time of the show, and Brian, you can, if you want to participate or not, where we try to bring up some pop culture clips. And I have a pretty good one for inflation. I don't know if I'm happy to go first. If
I'm going to have you go first. I'm going to very quickly look at my website, see if I can find
I'm going to give a shout out to Dan Keister and his Economics of the Office. And I think Dirk Batir was a collaborator on that with a couple others as well. But there is a clip where Dwight Schrute creates Schrute Bucks. And the Schrute Buck is this fictitious dollar for performance rewards. However, at the end of, there's a bonus part where Creed prints a lot of counterfeit Schrute Bucks and discusses flooding the market with Schrute Bucks in order to depreciate the value of the Schrute Buck that Dwight is trying to cash out, which we haven't really talked about, the causes of inflation very much on this episode. But one of the key cause, and Milton Friedman's phrasing was, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And it's correlated, whether you believe it's always and everywhere or not, it is highly correlated with the money supply. And I'm pretty close to the Friedman camp, thinking, yes, what is the money supply? Now, money supply is a weird definition because how much is digital versus paper, that gets tougher. But if you are interested in that clip, go to economicsoftheoffice.com. Type in Schrute for Dwight Schrute. You could watch the clip, but it's a fantastic clip. We'll also link to that in the description in the show notes.
All right.
Brian, do you want to go?
I'll go next. So this was tough for me because there are a few really good illustrations of inflation, but oh gosh, I'm not sure which one to pick. I'm going to have to go with Harry Potter.
I know that was going to be one of mine.
Oh no! Well, I bet mine's different. I bet mine's different than yours. So, if you look at the price, if you watch the movies or read the books, more importantly, read the books. If you look at the price of things in the first book versus how they progress throughout the course of the series, there are some wild price differences. So the one that really stands out is the price of the newspaper, because they're very specifically given. So at the beginning of the series, it costs you 5 newts, which is one of the monetary units in the wizard world, to buy a newspaper. And then very specifically, like 5 years later, the price of the paper is down to 1 newt. So there's actually deflation for that specific product. But if you go online to some of the stuff that J.K. Rowling's put out, the price goes up to 7 in a really short period of time. So the prices are like bouncing around for this thing. And I think it's really interesting when you compare that to the price of Harry's wand. So in the first year, he buys a wand, and the wand cost, I wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong here. And, no Potter files out there.
It's been a while, but I want to say it was about 10 galleons.
It was 7. It was actually 7.
Okay, I'm not that far off.
Which isn't that much, considering this is the most important thing you have as a wizard. And then in book 4, Harry's at the Tri-Wizard international tournament. They have this big tournament, and he buys this cheap thing called an omniocular. It's like this special binoculars, and the omnioculars are 10 galleons. So this cheap knockoff souvenir cost like 30, well, a little more than 30% more than his most important tool in the wizarding world. And so people have kind of investigated whether or not, what's going on in the wizarding world, and why are prices so radically different? It could be just that, J.K. Rowling didn't care what she put down as prices. That's probably what it is, but it's interesting.
But an economist will notice.
That's exactly right. So I'm actually working on a book on Harry Potter and economics, and like there's this enormous chapter in there about money and inflation, and so there's that.
I thought you were going to pick the opening one where Dudley is getting birthday gifts.
Oh gosh!
So I thought that was the one. So Dudley gets his birthday gifts and he counts them and he goes, "This is fewer than I got last year." And they rush out and go buy him like 2 more birthday gifts so that he has more. I thought it was going to be part of like the artificialness. Okay, so I will say I have 2. I would say I have 2, maybe 3, but part of it is I don't want to spoil one of them. I would really like you to be able to watch it. So I'm not going to pick the one that I think is the best one. I'm going to leave that as like a hanger and I'll tell you about it so that you can go find it yourself. I think the best one, and I hope that we can clip this actually, we could probably clip it into the sound bit to make it really good. The Bank of Jamaica, a couple of years ago, actually released a reggae song about monetary policy, inflation, and they talk about the benefits of low, stable inflation.
When I want it too high, when I want it too low, when inflation's stable and predictable, that's the way to go. 'Cause when it high,
it is actually put out by their central bank, and it's got this reggae beat to it, and they talk about just monetary policy and stuff like that. Absolutely fascinating. I'm going to assume that we could probably like grab 20 seconds of it and probably lay it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's their central bank, right? It's not like a Bank of America. So like, I feel like it's not a private company. They're probably okay with it. So that's the one I'm going to pick as my favorite one. The one I was on the fence about was Billy Paul's Let the Dollar Circulate, which is just, so I think we've talked about this in a previous one. I operate the Econ Media Library, which just has tons of video clips, music, all sorts of stuff on it. That video might be the highest viewed macro video that I have. So micro just like wipes everything out. Like micro is just so huge in terms of video clips. Yeah. And some of that could just be that macro professors and teachers don't know that there's video clips. Maybe, but like that's hands down, like every year, that's the top one. So I was close between those 2, but the one I want you to, I'll briefly tell you about it, but I won't tell you the ending. I think y'all all need to go watch this video because it's absolutely amazing. Matt, you've actually seen it because Lee Kopic starts all of his presentations with it because it's so good. So Brian, I don't know if you've seen it. It is a Thai bank. It's a Thai bank commercial. And it's the story of this little kid who dreams about being an astronaut. And so he's saving up money over and over. And it talks about how he's like saving and not going out with his friends and not buying a toy. It is an absolute really good commercial. I can't pronounce the name of the bank, but if you go to Econ Media Library, search like Thai savings or inflation, it'll pop up. Absolutely amazing video.
I'm guessing if you just put in Thai, there's not, you don't have, we're not going to be sifting through hundreds of examples from Thailand, right?
You'd be surprised. I think actually I'm gonna try it on YouTube and see if it works. If I just type in Thai bank commercial, yeah, actually,
I did that and it came up. Thai ad dream.
Yeah, this like the first one I have is this Thai bank commercial is brutal. It's a very good one, but yeah. So I'll go with the Bank of Jamaica.
So the audience can catch it.
I don't want to spoil it.
We will put that in the show notes as well. So
yeah, I really got to say real quickly, just something. I just thought of something, and that is Planet Money. The Planet Money podcast has this song that they've dug up from the from the 70s. By Sugar Daddy and the Gumbo Roo. It's about inflation. The song is inflation, and so it's. You can't believe somebody would have written this song, but because inflation was so bad in the 70s, like this was top of mind for people, and now they're sort of resurrecting this song out of the vault of forgotten favorites.
I completely forgot about that. So actually, the story behind that is I actually think Planet Money they found it. Like exactly said, they found a recording, but it had never been like officially recorded. They started a recording agency. And then record it, like they like transferred it over because I think like the guy who sang it died because it's like 50 years old.
Right.
Like there's a really cool kind of backstory. They were doing it, if I remember this episode, they were doing it as like a part of like the how does the music industry work? and then they started a recording company. I think it's called it's called Planet Money Records. So they started it, and then they recorded this. That's actually a really good song. I've listened to that a couple times. It's actually really interesting.
Well, before we go, Brian, appreciate you having you on here today. Appreciate you joining us. Want to give you a moment. I know you have a book that's out. You mentioned the Harry Potter's coming out, but anything you wanted to plug for the audience?
Oh, I guess I should shamelessly plug Why Superman Doesn't Take Over the World, about superheroes and economics. It's been out for a couple of years. Don't buy used copies, buy new copies. And, that would be fantastic. I'd appreciate that. Let's see, anything else? Oh yeah, I guess YouTube site is I_run_econ. So I'm trying to take my love of running and my love of economics out into the world. The problem is I find these awesome stories, and then I want to support them. And so there's this one I'm working on that's from a little town outside of I guess Marion's a little town, a littler town outside of Marion, Indiana, called The Fountain, that had this huge commons problem. I'm trying to deal with the Marion County Library system, and they've been great, but all their resources are on microfiche. So hopefully I'll have that one out soon. I've got one about the Tallahassee half marathon that I ran a couple months ago. So I_run_econ. And then, so those are the two big things. We're going to hopefully have the Harry Potter book under contract, hopefully soon. Thanks. It's been really fun. It's great hearing you guys on the pod, and thanks for having me on.
The question is, I have one final question. Actually, a question for you. Will you listen to this episode since you're on it?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually,
because you can't say that you've listened to all the episodes.
I'm going to have to now because I have to say I've listened to all of them. Now I'll also see if my wife will listen to and critique the performance here.
I'm sure she'll happily do that.
I'm sure too. Yeah.
That's fantastic. But thank you both for the time today, and look forward to seeing y'all in the next one. So.
I almost made it. Brian, how much is in that copper cup? None. There's the answer.
None. Yep, that's the answer.
This is fruited. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, cheers.